The great thing about the universe is it's big and it's old, so rare events happen all the time. There may be life elsewhere in our solar system. I'm betting there will be in the oceans of Europa or Enceladus under ice caps. And we may discover that in the next 10 or 20 years, that there are other independent geneses of life. If we discover that in our solar system, that's amazingly important. Because if there's more than one genesis of life in a single solar system, it really implies it's ubiquitous.
We are actually the creators of AI, then that continues to evolve.
Well, yeah, I mean, the intelligence we may discover in other systems may be AI, what you would call AI. But it could be that, as I suspect may happen on Earth, that the dominant intelligence may not be biological.
What's always amazing to me, Lawrence, is that the average person finds this stuff fascinating.
Well, but why is that amazing? Because you know what? I realized when I was writing the book, I want to talk about the ideas at the forefront of science. Are we alone in the universe? What does it mean to think? When I see green, is the same green you see? How did life originate? How did the universe begin? How will it end? These are the questions we all have. We give them up, but we all have those questions. So it's not so fascinating, it's not so surprising that questions at the edge of science fascinate people, because they're always the kind of unknown threshold that provokes us when we're kids, when we look up at the sky at night. If you know things before you even ask the questions, that's religion.
Have you changed your opinions about God?
Well, no, why would I do that? I would change my opinion if there was just one thing, evidence. All of the evidence is that there's no need for a creator.
Where are we going next, Lawrence? What do we have to do?
It could be wonderful or awful, and it's up to us. The future is racing towards us like a freight train, but it's doing so on tracks that we built. But one thing is certain, is the most exciting things in the future are those things we haven't the slightest idea about now. I like to say, I wake up every day, I'm surprised if I'm not surprised. If I'm not surprised, it's not a good day.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Lawrence Krauss, the world-renowned theoretical physicist, commentator, and best-selling author. You are the president of the Origins Project Foundation and host of the Origins podcast, where you discuss science, culture, and social issues. You've written over 500 publications on physics and astronomy, receiving many awards for your research, and have published 10 critically acclaimed books, including the New York Times bestsellers, The Physics of Star Trek and A Universe from Nothing. Your latest book, The Known Unknowns, Unresolved Mysteries of the Cosmos, explores cosmology's greatest unanswered questions and the importance in science of not knowing. You believe the unknown possibilities of our existence are fascinating to everyone and ultimately the driving force behind all new discoveries. Lawrence, welcome back to London Real.
It's great to be back here again. I always enjoy Brian. It's great.
It's great having you. This is like your fourth time you've been coming on.
Yeah,
for
I'm
5,
like
6,
a pro
7
at
years.
this now.
You're so good at this. And he's been dazzling me with his magic tricks. Go to our Instagram and you can see it. I'm pretty impressed. As a former magician, the skills are there.
I
the
can't
second
ask for anything
career
more.
is
Yeah, that's
calling.
right. I'm working on, just in case I have to have a backup in a new career, I'm working on magic.
You never know.
Yeah.
I want to dive into the book because there's some fascinating stuff, and people always want to know about the cosmos. They always want to know these things. But first, I got to get your hot take on some things that are happening right now. The first one is artificial intelligence. Now, you have probably known people in the artificial intelligence field for decades.
Yeah.
But obviously, ever since December last year, when ChatGPT got on people's minds, now everyone is talking about it. There's billions of dollars going into it. We're actually investing in a company here through London Real Ventures. I've had a bunch of people on, including MIT professor Max Tegmark from Future of Life Institute. I've had Peter Diamandis, another MIT grad as well, who created, I think, Singularity Institute. I've talked a lot about it. What is Lawrence Krauss's take on artificial intelligence?
Well, I'm not as. It's a very useful new technology, and like new technologies, they can go in many different directions. It will change the way we live. It'll change what it means to be human. But so have so many things. I mean, that's what I'm amazed at, the fixation of concern about it. I actually signed on one of the things that said we should hold off with ChatGPT moving past, mostly because I thought it was being trained incorrectly. It was a little too woke. And but I am more interested in what it can do and fascinated about what it could do. And so I take the long view. Actually, in the end of the book, I talk about AI. And when people talk about how it's going to ruin everything, I'm reminded of going back to ancient Greece, to Plato. Around that time, a little bit before, actually, a few hundred years before, the written language had come in. The Greek alphabet had come in. And around the time of Plato, everyone said that's the end of storytelling. There'll be no more storytelling because of writing, because people won't remember things anymore, and face-to-face really matters. Well, that's true, but writing did destroy storytelling. And AI will change a lot about the way we live, and whether it makes the world much better or much worse is kind of really up to us. Fortune favors the prepared mind, and so you should think about those issues. And there are possibilities that are dystopic, but at the same time, I think it's at this point it's much ado about very little. I think ChatGPT is amazing, but it's not thinking. But what it can do is amazing, and it can be useful. And people are worried that people use it instead of writing, but it can help you. And I suspect there'll be many other areas that AI will help people, and it'll replace jobs, and that's unfortunate. But many things replace jobs. Automation replace jobs, and again, you can imagine a future, which is probably the future, where the people who control AI control all the resources. That's one way it could go. Or it could go in a way where, a lot of people don't have jobs, but the rest of us could spend our time in coffee shops listening to music or reading books, and life would be better. And we can choose that. It is interesting that the jobs that it'll probably replace are the opposite of what people thought. I think people thought about robotics replacing menial jobs. Those are probably more safe than doctors and lawyers, and so it replaces all the lawyers. Well, that's no loss, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, so I have mixed feeling about it, but I think we have to take the long view that every new technology has pluses and minuses, and even smartphones changed what it means to be human. I was just on the tube, and I was reminded. I was talking to a friend yesterday that 20 years ago, I remember when I was in Japan, I'd go on the trains there, and everyone would be staring down at something. It wasn't a smartphone back then, but it was maybe 30 years ago. But they'd all be staring at it. That's just a weird thing. And now you go on the tube, everyone's staring at it. So it's changed what it means to be human. Has it made it worse? Well, in some ways it has, but in other ways, just think of the things you can do that you couldn't do before.
Yeah, it's weird because we can say a lot about things about mobile phones, and it keeps you not present, and social media can be toxic. But like on the flip side, I know this, and a bunch of influencers that I know that have been on the show, they said, I've met my best friends on social media, because you find people like you all around the world that normally you would never bump into. And so you can actually make some amazing connections. You can, and I'm always, not that this sounds weird, but I know sometimes when I respond to someone who's written me, they're surprised that they're interacting with me. And it makes their day. That's great. I feel very fortunate about that. But I've had the same thing happen to me, and it's amazing who you can connect with. That's one of the examples. You can connect directly with people you would never have imagined you'd be able to connect directly to, and this is just one of the small aspects. So it's changed the world, and it is unfortunate that kids maybe fixate to it, and maybe they don't read so much, and you can all the standard arguments against it. But no, I think AI is fascinating, and it's like quantum computing. Another area it's going to be fascinating, but there's a lot of hype, and I'm always opposed to hype. So in any area of science and technology, and maybe people need hype in order to sell things, and that's okay. But
so things are never as, the future that people discuss are never as near as the future really is. But the real future, what I love about the real future is you don't anticipate it. That's why when someone says there's a futurist, I don't listen to them. Because it's like science fiction, right? Which I supposedly get asked a lot about because of the physics of Star Trek. We're not driving flying cars right now. All the future that people imagined in the 1950s and 60s, that's not the future. But the internet, which people didn't imagine, is the future. So I like the fact that the future is totally unexpected. It's not knowing. And not knowing makes life exciting. My God, it would be so awful if we knew everything.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Star Trek in that book that's a bestseller for you. I met William Shatner this year at it was like a blockchain conference in Texas, and one of our companies we invested in was doing his digital collectible. And I don't fanboy very often, but I was like, I gotta meet Bill. And so we hung out with him, and I watched a bunch of old Star Treks. And then there was one where he was actually talking to a computer and asking it to create a summary, and it was just very AI.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, computer, can you summarize all this stuff?
Yeah.
And it came back with a response.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, I never really realized that was kind of ChatGPT back in the 60s.
Exactly. There's a lot, and it's often accidental. I mean, when I wrote the Star Trek book, and there's lots of things that have come to pass, but it's only because creative people imagining solutions to problems often come up with similar solutions. It's not as if science fiction caused the science, but sometimes, to scan you, right? The Star Trek was created before even ultrasound. But obviously it's better if I want to find out what's going on inside of you, to be able to have some way of learning about without opening you up. And we were talking earlier about people who are older, and Bill, who happens to be another friend of mine, is 92.
Yeah, 93.
And we just did a podcast, and it's hysterical. You should watch it. We've done a few things together, and every time we do, it just breaks me up. He's so interesting and funny and on the ball. Again, when I think of people, when I think of getting a lot older, and I look to people like him and say, okay, there's hope.
Yeah, he just went into space. He's still completely irreverent, very opinionated,
absolutely.
And everybody loves him. At the conference, everybody went gaga.
Yeah, and because he is fun, and he doesn't take himself too seriously. And it's hysterical. He reminds me of my uncle. I told him that who's now passed away, but was one of my favorite relatives. And we're both of course Canadian, which is really part of the another secret.
Canadian mafia.
Yeah.
Is there anybody you don't know? I mean, you did stage shows with Johnny Depp. You're doing movies where you star in with Werner Herzog.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
There's a lot of people I'm sure I don't know.
Oh my gosh,
But,
you're plugged in.
But anyway.
Just with AI quickly, you're a physicist, and a lot of people make the comparison of technology that can be destructive to humanity by going back and looking at the atomic bomb and fission and fusion. Obviously, the movie Oppenheimer just came out, and so it's the only example people grasp to when they say, here are these scientists working on a technology that can not only kill the scientists, but kill everybody else. And AI is the only real equivalent that we think of in that sense.
Sure. In fact, I was for a dozen years the head of the board of sponsors of the Bolton the Atomic Scientists, which, by the way, was created by Oppenheimer and Einstein. They were the first heads of that, and I felt very honored to have that position later on. But when I was, its primary purpose was to warn people about the dangers of nuclear war. In 1947, created, and scientists talking about the dangers of nuclear war. When I came on board in 2006 or 2007, we decided to broaden it to talk about all existential risks. So not just nuclear weapons, but the time we were concerned about biological weapons, and eventually AI became one of the things. So it's one of the things the bulletin now focuses on. I'm not involved in the bulletin anymore, but I have mixed feelings about having put all those things in the same box, because they're very different. Nuclear war can end humanity like that. AI is a potential existential threat, as are some aspects of biological weapons, but they're much longer term. And climate change was another one we added, but they're all very different. But you could imagine a future. You can imagine the Terminator future, right? Which is what people imagine.
Yeah.
But it always amazes me that people imagine the Borg or that kind of thing instead of things where AI really is a useful tool. And who says the future is human? I mean, it sounds awful to say that, but it could be the long term that biology has to incorporate aspects of what you would call artificial intelligence, which I think is neither artificial nor intelligent at this point. But it does have the you can imagine the technology. Certainly, for example, if you put together AI and nuclear weapons, right? If AI had the decision when to launch nuclear weapons, then that's really of concern. But of course it's of concern. But right now, what most people don't realize is in the United States, the president can decide to launch nuclear weapons and is the only person that can do that. No one else has to approve it. So do you feel better about AI or a few years ago, Donald Trump being, so you got to worry. We somehow think, if humans are involved, better decisions will be made. But that may not always be so clear. So it's a double-edged sword. But all really fascinating technologies in one way or another have impacts for good or bad. I mean, industrialization did too, right? And it changed the world, and it caused a lot of problems. Sweatshops and those kind of factories, and in England early on. But in principle, we are rational human beings who can then look and try and improve things. I mean in principle, because it happens too little. But we can look at things and try and moderate them. And the best thing we can do is talk about the options in advance, so we're prepared, as I say, because that kind of technology does evolve very quickly. Technology as a whole evolves very quickly, much more quickly than our ability as humans to fully adapt to it. But we can at least think about it in advance and try and imagine and discuss, so we're more prepared. And who knows what the future is going to bring. But the future is terrifying, but it's also exhilarating. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Also, nuclear weapons are quite an example of us being in control of them. I mean, so far we have.
It's amazing, right? Over 70 years, they haven't been used since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I actually am surprised, and I have said, as I often say, I don't make predictions about the future except for 2 trillion years in the future, where it's easy and then no one's around to check. But it would be surprising if nuclear weapons were not used against a civilian population sometime this century. Now, what will happen about that? I don't know, and I'd love to be wrong in that prediction. So
it's still one of our most dangerous threats, one of our most existential risks.
And people don't talk. People talk about AI more than nuclear weapons when there's still 1,000 nuclear weapons on each side of the U.S. and Russia that are on hair trigger alert. Yeah. But people are some more worried about ChatGPT, and it's kind of interesting to me.
There's a great movie called The Fog of War with Robert McNamara before he passed away.
Yeah.
And at the very end, that's his final warning, is that this is the most dangerous existential threat we face. And it comes on the back of a conversation I think he had with Fidel Castro 40 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, where he found him at some meeting and they were having dinner in the back, and he said, "Would you have pressed the button?" And he said, "You goddamn right I would have." And he said, even knowing it would have killed 90 million Americans and killed everybody in Cuba. And he said, yes, I would have. And for him, that was like this realization that, oh my God, even as humans, we can make such critical errors because of our egos and our emotions.
It depends on the day.
Yeah.
I'm pessimistic. But then as another friend of mine, I hate to be...
name dropping again. Come on, I like it. I like when you name drop.
Okay.
You do it in a nice way.
A writer named Cormac McCarthy, who's passed away, but was a good friend. But when I first met him, his futures are very dystopic, and when I first met him, I was surprised at how chipper he was, and I said, how can you be so? And he said to me, "I'm a pessimist, but that's no reason to be gloomy," which is my motto now if I have one.
I love that. But the road is a tough watch. But
it's a tough read. I could only read 3 pages of that book a day because it just was so reading. And he wrote it for his son as a present, and who I know his son, and it's an interesting present for your son.
Wow, and it's tough read and still not an easy watch either.
Yeah.
Mads is a great actor in it. So
So
all right, and one thing, final point about nuclear weapons. Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz, big investor from Silicon Valley, was on Rogan's episode recently, and he did make a good reminder. He said there was never a World War III. And he said that's because of this threat of nuclear weapons.
So far, mutually assured destruction has worked up to now.
Yeah.
Unless it leads to mutually assured destruction.
Right.
And so, Yeah, what I think people would say, and again, I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that World War III will be the last one but who knows? But people always said World War I would be the last one, so you never know. I'm not so optimistic.
You alluded to ChatGPT and the fact that it was kind of spitting out wokeness, and there was a lot of tests on it, and it was being trained on the internet, and the internet is being censored by typically Silicon Valley companies who have their own view of the world that they export to the world. Tell me about big tech. Tell me about fundamentalist wokeism. Like, what are we dealing with today? Because it's an important issue to talk about. You're probably one of the few people that will talk about it. Everyone's experiencing this right now. It's a topic du jour, even in England right now, because we have a very famous speaker, comedian, Russell Brand, who's being demonetized from YouTube. Members of government are reaching out, basically asking platforms to close him down, demonetize him, based on headlines and accusations, and
without ever proof.
No proof, no
court of law, no fair.
Which is maybe just an example of what could be in the future. What do you see? This has been happening for years.
Well, if you ask me about things that terrify me, that is something that terrifies me, because you take the area where I know best from my life's experience, which is academia and science, which should be immune from this, and isn't. The biggest anathema to science is not being able to ask